start, I will do a bit of intro, and then we can dive deep into coding. Also, the instructions are also on the meetup page as a comment, just in case you want the URL. Node 4. I'm using Node 4. Anyone not using Node 4? No? Do npm install 4. Great. All right, we can get started as your dependencies are being installed. This workshop is on server-side rendering. It's not really a workshop, but it will be live coding. So I'll take you through an application which is not server-side capable, and we'll turn that into one that renders from the server and everything that goes along with it. And I'll also introduce you to how to make asynchronous API calls through Redux. So before we go into that, a bit about myself. I am a software engineer in San Francisco with a startup called Mulesoft. We are an integration platform, and it's one of the big startups over there. Very cool technologies. We use React, Redux, Node.js, a bit of legacy Java, microservices architecture, Docker, Kubernetes. So very exciting. We're always hiring. So just like Andy gave a spiel about power reviews, if you ever want to move down to San Francisco, you can reach out to me. So regarding server-side rendering, so what is server-side rendering? So React, as you guys know, we package the entire application and we serve it to the client, and the client does not need the server at all. So where does server-side rendering come in? It comes in when the crawlers, or when you want to go into a route, and you're looking not so. Initially, when an application is loaded, you make a request to the server, usually on the main URL. So if it's irfanbaqui.com, makes a request to the server, downloads the artifacts, which is usually a bundle or multiple bundles, along with index.js file. Now, if I go to irfanbaqui.com/blog, that website or that route is not supported because my server does not support it. So what we can do is support that route, and what that means is on the server, I will render the entire DOM that you'll see on the client. I will serve it to the client, and before the client even downloads the entire bundle, it'll be able to display the DOM to you. So you'll be able to see my blog without even installing the large package, the large React package. So the advantages of server-side rendering, the first one is that it's much faster. The second is there are a lot of crawlers out there, and not all crawlers use the JavaScript engine. So if it does not, it wouldn't be able to go to a route in your application if it is just on the client side. If you go to irfanbaqui/blog, it wouldn't be able to parse that, because for it to do that, it needs to go to Irfan first, download the bundle.js and everything, and then proceed to go to that route. And that's not just for, so it's not just for search engine crawlers. If I make a scraper, and you want to support third-party scrapers, you want to make sure that everyone, doesn't matter what engine they're running the scraper on, is able to parse all of the routes in your application. And just abiding by the general notion of serving documents in API. So I request a route, and the server responds with everything I need for that route. The server doesn't respond generically, just give me the bundle.js for every single route, and then I have to do it on the client side. That's not the standard. All right, so what we're going to do in this workshop is we'll take a client-side application and we'll implement server-side rendering on it. Is everyone done with their installation of NPM dependencies? Anyone not done? Go ahead.
Which project in that page were we supposed to do NPM install on?
So you see the workshop.
Okay, the workshop one? Okay.
Yep, and do NPM install there. Great. So after you're done, can you please give me a thumbs up so I know? Installed with all the dependencies. We done? Great. All right. So let me go back. So now we will, in order to implement server-side rendering, the way we do it is to implement middleware in our application. So if you, let me give you a quick tour of the application before I jump in. It is basically a very bare bones Redux clone. Let me start it. CD workshop. Start. Great. All right. So it's a Redux clone. You can create new posts. And right now this functionality is not there. And it will be there with server-side rendering. So we can get started. So the first thing we do is we intercept all the requests in our server and pass in a request handler that will basically look at what the URL is, and it will render the appropriate DOM based on that URL. So if you can go to server.js and make use of the middleware there. If you're not familiar with Node.js, app.use basically you can intercept all of the incoming requests, make changes to it, and then pass it on further in the chain. So we implement a middleware, and then the first step is to create a Redux store. So everything that we do on the client side, we want to do on the server side. The client has a Redux store, and from that store, it initializes the state, and it passes the store to all of its components. Is everyone familiar with Redux? Who's not familiar with Redux? This is 3 or 4. Okay. Redux is, let me give you a quick overview. So without Redux, have you implemented state in React without Redux? Yes. Okay, so without Redux, each component, the way you implement state is you pass down the state, and you also pass down the handlers if you want to make changes to the parent or to the state. And what Redux does is it provides a global object. There's nothing else to it. It's just a global object with wrappers. Provides a global object to your entire application that each of your components can access. So the way it does it is you create a store. It has actions and it has reducers. And I want everyone on the same page. So it's beneficial to go through this. I know a few of you would be bored right now, but it has actions, it has reducers, and you don't need any of those. At the end of the day, you just need a function that takes the initial state and it does some modifications to it, and it passes a new state. And by state, I just mean a global object that your application is using to render, to display data, right? So what we do is we create a store and we pass a reducer and the default state, which is the initial state, to our application. And let's see. So the first step is to create a Redux store on our server side. So if you go to the request handler, as we were short on time and this is a very extensive topic, I have everything laid out for us from the start. So step one is just an overview of this file. This is our middleware that we return or that we use, and all of the requests that come in pass through this middleware. So what I'm doing right now is I have an API server running. Very, very simple server. It reads from the data.txt file and it writes to it. So our state is the data.txt file. So going back to request handler, we make a request for all of the posts using the request module, and inside of it now, that's where all the magic is. So we put in step one. And over here, we're basically creating a Redux store on the client side. Nothing else. To create a store, you pass in the reducer and you pass in a default state. And the state is what we get from our API call. Now, step two is to get the initial state. So anytime we are rendering from the server, there are two things that the client needs. One is the already pre-rendered DOM, and the second is the initial state. And what I mean by initial state is a state for that particular route that was requested to the server. So we have to give the initial state to the server somehow, and we get it from here.
Is there any way you can increase the font?
Oh, is it too small? Shorter. Let's see. It's better? Please remind me to do this on every file that I access. So I just pinched out on this. All right. So you get the initial state, and we'll do things with the initial state later on. But the next thing is to define the component that you want to render on the client side. Now the components will differ based on the request that comes in, and that is something that our React router will handle. We'll get into that later in the workshop. But for now, we will define a generic component that it will render when a request comes in. Great. Everyone with me? So this render to string function is provided by the React DOM, especially for server-side rendering, to convert the components into a string. Now the next thing is to actually build a DOM on the server side, and there are two components to it. One is to format and stringify the component that we're rendering, and the second is to prepare the HTML. And what I mean by that is get an HTML template and stitch in our component into it, and then serve it to the client. Is the pace okay? Everyone following? Okay, great. All right. So step 4, what I do is I define an external function that we'll call, and it has our HTML template. So right now, our index.html is, the server doesn't do anything with index.html. It is just served, right? In our application, the bundle.js is accessed inside of this index.html, and our application is appended to this div. So something similar we need to provide from the server to the client in server-side rendering. And this is how we do it. So I initialize, or I define a new function. I call it render full page, and I serve it. Copy and paste step 5 right here. So I'm calling the function. I'm passing in our component, which is appended to the div, and I'm passing in our initial state. Now this initial state is nothing but a script tag inside of which I define a global variable called initial state, and I provided a stringified JSON object to it. So the state we had on the server side that we got from the Redux store, we give that to the client because that is the correct state for the particular route that the client is requesting. Make sense? Great. All right. So the last thing that we did was to send the HTML to the client. Now, whatever we had to do on the server side, we have done, but the client needs to be ready to accept these additional things from the server, besides just the index.html file and middle.js. So that is the next step. So we need to make the client-side code use a server-side DOM. And the first step is to actually use the initial state that's provided by the server and not create its own state. So just a bit of background information on the structure of the repo. Everything to do with client-side applications is in app.js, and this is where we'll spend the majority of time. And everything to do with the server-side React is in the request handler. And then we'll jump through a few of the other files as well. So over here, as you can see, we are creating a store, and we are getting the initial state, we call it the default state, from a ready file, just a JSON file. So now we take that out and we utilize the initial state we get from the server. And from that initial state, we create a store. So initially, we were creating a Redux store with a post reducer with the default state, doing nothing else. We are just using initial state that comes in from the server. Now, distinguish between the client and server-side specific code. So now we have application code that is the same on the client and the server, but for example, let me show you a component. So with React, you use not app shell. Let's see, add post. With React, you import styles and you use it in your components, right? With not using even with using Babel, it's not going to work unless you do some weird turnarounds or workarounds. But basically, you can't require a styles object inside of your JavaScript file unless you're on the server. So you initialize the process.environment.browser, and we'll go into how we did it later on. But you initialize this variable that is set to true only when the application is on the client side. So it can parse this CSS. Yes, please.
Can you increase the font?
Oh, yes. So it can parse the CSS, and when you're on the server side, you don't use that. And we'll go into what exactly you use for the server side. Does this make sense? You do the same thing for all of your files that are requiring CSS styles. So, okay, one last thing. So in your Webpack config, you define a new plugin. Everyone familiar with Webpack? Who's not familiar with Webpack? So Webpack is nothing fancy but a module bundler. What it does is you give it an entry point where to start parsing your code, and you give it an exit point where to output that code, right? So you start with an entry point, you look at, okay, what are dependencies defined over here? You look into those dependencies, you look into dependencies of dependencies, and what it does is it flattens out everything. It creates a bundle and outputs that bundle to whatever path you specify. Now that is the simplest case. What the power of Webpack comes in where you can parse files through loaders and modify those files to do what you want them to do. For example, we want to parse all of the CSS files. So you know we are requiring the styles in JavaScript, right? And the way we do it, the way it works, is through Webpack. And that is part of the we're not parsing all the files on the server side through Webpack, and that's part of the reason it doesn't work on the server side. So for this, we define a plugin to distinguish between the server and the client code, and we just give it an environment variable that runs on the browser. It is set to true. Now, what you also do is when you're on the server, you have to set it to false. And I think I took it out. Oh no, it's right here. So when you're on the server, you have to set it to false, so that it doesn't parse all of those files. Everyone with me? So we distinguish between the client and server-side code, and let me save, let me run, and my API server is running. Hopefully this runs as expected. That's never the case, right? So can't read property posts of undefined. Let's see, state dot posts. So the state is undefined, it seems, and that means that there's something going on in the request handler. Let's see, default state as send page, show state, and over here I set the initial state, and it also has, okay, .js. The server and all right. All right, seems like our store is not initializing state the way we want it. Okay, we do get the state. So what's going on? We do get the state. Just bear with me for a moment. Oh, the API call is never made. There we go. Stellar, localhost 808. Probably close. I do have posts. It's probably there. Mm-hmm. All right.
Sending the initial state to the client because it seems that the initial state at that point is undefined. Console log line 38. I think the initial state will be
Line 38 over here.
yeah. If you do a console log,
I think it's undefined over here.
yeah, the initial state is not defined.
That's the it's not very CSS servers.
All right, let's see.
Should return something, shouldn't it?
Oh, it's defining that.
Oh, okay. I know you could do that. Yeah.
So I'm going to try initial state. Oh, see, initial state at that point is a JSON object, so we have to specify it. And what's the deal? What is the deal? Let me go to the request handler here. If the template is a problem, then we'll know right now. I don't think it is a problem. Oh, just making sure nothing's cached. Yeah. All right. So the state over here is undefined as well.
Yeah.
Which is strange because let me
Yeah, there you go. That's
let me go to the network.
that or one of those I can't run it.
Yeah. So nothing's received from the local host. Anyone else got this working? Was following along? No?
Still? Are you getting that error on? Yeah.
Can you keep that endpoint, the one that is on the
This one?
yeah. Let's see what that guy returns.
That's what I'm thinking. It's not. It does. So the endpoint's good. Inside of request handler, I should. Oh, you know what? I think. Let me go back to. I think this is where the problem is. The handler itself. So right now, nodes.
There we go. I don't know that. That's fine.
So that's not, so the state is not being propagated for some reason. So our handler is good. Has to do with .js. Let me make sure this is what is initialized in server.js. Oh no, request handler. Yep.
You can check in the browser that firewall is defined.
No, but the browser, the thing is the server doesn't send. The browser doesn't get anything, right?
Right.
The Webpack middleware on the counter's acting.
Is it because there's like the server
Points like the middleware and serverless.
versus like this thing?
The Webpack middleware and server.js. Now, the only middlewares I'm using over here are for hot reloading. Those are very static. Let's see. Oh, that's our problem. Sorry, I totally missed this. So if we are not using server-side rendering, we have to serve the index.html page somehow, right? So we have a route for that on the server, and when you switch to client-side rendering or server-side rendering, you don't need that because your request handler is now serving. You're not serving directly yourself. So you take that out, save. So we're back on track. If I can restart this, I'm confident. All right, back in business. So where were we? Let me refresh this. And now I'm just left with a lot of console logs in my code I need to clean up. All right. So define routes on the server now. So as you saw, or maybe you didn't, I go to /post/1, and it gives me the expected result. This is the first post, but it throws an error. It says that React attempted. Let me zoom in if I can. Oh no. Throws an error saying, says that React attempted to use a markup that was given by the server. It wasn't able to because the checksum, in the sense that the whatever was rendered, the DOM rendered on the server and sent to the client, didn't match the DOM that was created by the server after it already received the DOM from the server. So it says that it's probably due to it's probably due to XYZ, but it detects that we are using server-side rendering, and there's something wrong with that. And what is wrong with this is no matter what route we have, we are always serving the same component. The components that we're serving in the request handler are static. We're always serving the home page. And that's something we don't want. We want to serve the routes from the server, which are the same as the ones specified on the client side. So let's see what routes are there on the client side. We are importing a routes object. If I go into routes, these are routes defined on the client side. So let's go back to our request handler and make use of those routes. So React Redux gives us a very convenient method to match the routes. It's called match, and you pass in an object. The first property should be the routes that you define on the client side, and the second should be the URL that you receive from the client. Takes that URL and it matches that with the routes, and it extracts out the components that should be rendered on the client side. So how we do it is, let me copy this whole thing. Take this out. Paste this. Comment. So we create an object. And this is ES6 syntax, same as routes. We create an object. First property, the routes. The second, the request.url. And we call this match function. We give it that object, and what it returns is, if there's an error in parsing, it'll return the error. In our routes, we can specify that a route redirects to a different route. If that's the case, it will give us information in the redirect location, the second parameter. And if that's not the case, then it will give us all of the context of that route that needs to be rendered. So we are handling the error, we're handling redirects, but what is important is this baby right here. So we are calling the render to string function just like we called earlier, and we're passing in the provider. Inside of it, there is another component called router context, and that component will basically use all of the route context provided by match, and it will parse out the components that need to be rendered. So you provide that, and you stitch that in to the DOM, to the HTML template, and you send it to the client. Everyone with me? Make sense? Cool. All right. So save this. Start the server. I go back. And now I refresh. Let me take out my console. Now I refresh, and I don't get that error anymore. Because from the start, we are giving the client the correct components to render. And when at the end, the client gets the bundle.js, and it is rendering the component on its side, and it is checking, okay, are there any differences between what I rendered and what the server gave me? There are no differences. If there was a difference, I would get an error right here. So this is in just server-side rendering. There is nothing much to it. We basically render on the server, and we serve it to the client. Now, what I also wanted to cover today is, oh, wait, before we get into that, there is a delay in loading styles. So if I go back, and let me just go into posts. There is no posts. There's just this. So as you can see, when I refresh, you catch that? And that's because we are not taking into account any of the styles being imported in our JavaScript files on the server. So the server is not sending any of those to the client. So when the server loads its bundle.js, that's when we get all of the styles, which is not production worthy. It's not efficient, right? So one way around it. Any thoughts how we can step around that? No thoughts?
Extract your CSS.
Extract the CSS. Straightforward. So you go into Webpack, and you, instead of just putting all of our CSS through the style loader and the CSS loader, we said, okay, whatever these loaders are parsing, you also extract all of that into its own file. And that's going to be a CSS file. So uncomment this. So over here, in order to do that, we're creating a new text, extract text plugin, and we're giving it a name. This will be main.css. And we are saying that extract all of the text that is being parsed by these two loaders and dump them into my main.css file. So I save this. I say npm run start. I go here, I refresh. Now life's good. There is no delay. So in just that was server-side rendering. But today I also want to cover asynchronous API calls. So almost all of us are familiar with Redux, right? With Redux, we have actions and we have reducers. And with Redux, we have actions and we have reducers. And basically, we use those actions to fire off events that the reducers are listening to, and they change the state, how we want the state to be changed. And that's what changes the layout of our application. Now, what if I want to make API calls outside, and I want to make my app only refresh when I get the response back from the API calls? So it has to be synchronous, right? So we can use some of the APIs made available from Redux, or we can't. But at the end of the day, we want to make things synchronous. So there's a promise middleware that we can use. Has nothing to do with Redux. You basically convert all of the calls that you're making out to APIs to use promises. So you make that call only when you get the response back. Do you change the state? Or we use something that is built by the React team. It's called Redux Thunk. And it does exactly the same thing, but it is built and maintained by but not the React team, the Redux team. It's built and maintained by them, so it's good to use it. So the way we do it, let me give you a brief background on actions. So this is an example of normal action, right? You want to upload a post. You call this action, which is just a function. You call this function, which returns an object, and it has a type, and it has any additional properties that are needed for that action to be completed. Now, in order for us to use React Thunk to make asynchronous API calls, the action, instead of returning an object, it has to return a function. Now, whenever an action returns a function, that's when our middleware knows that, oh, okay, this is an asynchronous action. So let me execute this myself. So what happens over here is this action inside of it, it returns a function, and our middleware provides two parameters to this function. One is dispatch and the other one is the get state. They come in very handy. So dispatch is to fire off other actions, and get state is just to get this current state of our application. So if I want to create a new post, this is just an example, I'll go through it. If I want to create a new post, first I will dispatch an action saying that creating a new post. So I'm starting to create a new post, basically. And then as part of the initial action that was dispatched, that returned the function, I have post details available. So I make a request, and this is not an actual request. This is pseudocoded. But basically, I make a request to my API. I post whatever details I need to post. And then only when I get a response back from the API, I say, OK, now I have the ID of the new post that was created. Dispatch another action that says, or that kind of triggers to our application saying that, OK, I started creating the post. There was a lag in the middle. Now I'm done creating the post. So you can update your state now. Between this, you're in limbo state. You can't update state. It's not going to do anything, right? And also, you want this to be permissified, because unless you get a response back from this request, you don't have a post ID. You don't have necessary details to render or to change the state, to implement a new state. So let me go back. So we're using Redux Thunk for asynchronous calls. The first thing is to define appropriate actions to make API calls. So I go into my actions, and over here you'll see all of these actions are the generic actions. But if I want to create a new post, this will be asynchronous, because I need to communicate with the API. So first of all, I need to return a function for my middleware to know that it's asynchronous. And I'm dispatching a new action over here that says toggle loading. What this does is, if you look at the initial state of our application, it has posts, and it has a property called app state. Is loading by default is false, but when we create a new post and I say create, it should show me a spinner, right? And in that limbo, I'm not getting anything. After the server responds saying that, OK, a new post created, can I go ahead and tell the user, OK, new post created, this is it. So let me go back to my actions. The next thing we do is we make a request with the post details, and in response, the server gives us the post ID of the new post that was created, and we dispatch the same action again to say that, OK, loading's done, and we dispatch a new action that says post is created. Now we can display it on the client side. And if there are any errors, we do some error handling. So going back, defining reducers to change state based on asynchronous API calls. So we looked at the actions. These actions trigger reducers, and at the end of the day, the state is being modified by the reducers. So let's go back to actions, and over here we dispatch the toggle loading action, right? And toggle loading is of type toggle loading, and over here it hits this case in our reducer, and it toggles the loading state. I don't need this console log. Take it out. And it returns the result. Nothing else. Now there is another action which is post created. Now there is much more action in this action. It takes the response back from the server, and it says, okay, append the post in my existing list of posts and return the result. So whatever state that was modified on the server side is now modified on the client side. So going back, applying the Thunk middleware in the client Redux store. So if I go back to app.js, right now the store is just a reducer and the initial state. Now I need to comment this out. And now we're using a middleware as well. And we have a handy function to apply middleware. So you can write your own middleware too if you want. But essentially what this does is when an action is fired before it reaches the store or the reducer, you can do things to the action. You can fire off other actions. You can modify the state, whatever you want. So that is pretty much it. So let's make sure, let's do a demo. Let's make sure nothing breaks this time. We didn't run this for a long time, right? So something has to break. Because we're not doing it right. So restart. I create. Test post, submit, and we got this. I can go in the post and everything's good. This was the UUID created by the API server. Sent it to the client. Client already had information about the post details. He just stored it with this ID. So that's in sync with the client, with the server. So one thing I want to show you is going back inside of the reducer. Not the reducer, inside of the action. We're loading, we're toggling our app state from is loading false to is loading true, correct? So let's console log. Let's see. Actually, let's console log in the reducer itself. Maybe that's why I had the console log here. There we go. So let's console log the state when it is loading, when it is loading, and then when it is not loading, because this happens so fast. Unless I put a set timer on it, you're not going to see it. So a good thing would be just to log the results. I clear off the console, do this. Oh, I'll need to restart. So I create a new post, say hi there, testing. I post it. Now you see that, okay, it was loading, other actions were performed. Like you can see, it's logging something else, which was outside of the reducer. And then it's set to is loading equals false. And that's when the application went about in the next business. So as you can see, now we are in sync with the server. Every time we create the post, we send it back to the server. It kind of stores it over there. So even if I do a hard refresh, the posts are still there. And this is only possible with asynchronous API calls. And that is it. Thank you. Any questions?